Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Hello there, weary traveler. Welcome to this quiet, comforting nook of history, a place where time slows down and stories whisper softly to the soul. Before we set out on our journey back to the harsh, unyielding winters of medieval times, I want to send you a heartfelt greeting. Whether you're nestled snug beneath your blankets, ready to drift gently into sleep, or simply seeking a peaceful escape through the gentle art of storytelling, I'm truly grateful that you've chosen to be here with me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear from you. Where in this vast, spinning world are you tuning in from? What hour is it in your corner of the earth? Drop a comment and share your story if you feel like it. There's something magical about knowing we come together from so many places, all connected by a shared curiosity and love for the past. And if this slow, soothing journey through history touches your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Now take a deep breath and let the noise and worries of the modern world fade away. Imagine yourself stepping through a doorway into a long-forgotten age, where winter's icy grip was far more than a mere inconvenience. It was a relentless test of survival. Picture the vast countryside of medieval Europe stretching before you. The trees stand bare now, their last golden leaves long since scattered to the ground, and the low, pale sun struggles to warm the biting cold that laces the air. Underfoot, the frosted fields crunch softly, while the wind carries the first shy snowflakes, a delicate harbinger of what's to come. Winter is approaching, and in this time and place, that word carries weight heavy with fear, struggle, and endurance. The cold creeps in slowly at first, whispering through the cracks in thatched roofs and seeping into bones and spirits alike. It will linger month after long month until the world is swathed in white and rivers and ponds lie silent beneath glassy sheets of ice. This was an age before the comfort of central heating, before walls thick enough to keep the chill at bay. Warmth was a precious hope, reserved only for those who lived in grandeur. Yet, the winters of old were not always this merciless. There was a time when the seasons flowed gently, predictable as a well-loved song, when the snow's arrival was met not with dread, but quiet acceptance, a familiar part of the endless cycle. But then the world shifted. The skies darkened, the winds grew colder, and the earth seemed to hold its breath. The Little Ice Age had begun. Stretching from the 14th century well into the 19th, this harsh climate changed everything. Winters grew crueler, the frost biting deeper than memory could hold. The reasons behind this cold turn remain a mystery, whispers of shifting suns and restless oceans, but the impact was undeniable. Fields that once promised plenty lay barren, livestock dwindled, and the unforgiving wind howled like a mournful spirit through empty villages. One unforgettable winter stands as a stark testament to this frozen fury, the Great Frost of 1709. That year, the cold was so fierce, so unrelenting, that rivers and lakes hardened into solid ice. In London, the mighty Thames transformed into a surreal frozen highway. People dared to set up shops upon the ice itself, lighting fires to stave off the merciless chill. It was a sight of strange beauty, and yet behind the wonder was a heavy price paid in suffering and loss. Many perished from the cold that year, huddled in their homes as the world outside turned to ice. But amidst all the suffering, there were some who found a strange sort of comfort in the frigid weather. One such figure was a young Isaac Newton, then a student at the University of Cambridge. When the Great Frost hit, Newton was forced to return home to his family's farm. There, huddled by the fire, he found himself with plenty of time to ponder the mysteries of the universe. It was during this unexpected break that Newton began to develop some of his most groundbreaking ideas, laying the foundations for his theories on calculus and optics. Who knows what other great minds might have been inspired by the quiet isolation of a long, cold winter. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has a way of seeking out the light. But for the vast majority of people in medieval times, winter was a season to be endured rather than enjoyed. The rich could afford thick woolen clothing, ample firewood, and well-stocked larders to see them through the lean months. But for the peasants and serfs who made up the bulk of the population, it was a very different story. Imagine waking up each morning in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from the sputtering fire. Your breath mists in front of you as you rise from your straw mattress, careful not to disturb the shivering forms of your family members huddled around you for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack and crevice, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache. Breakfast, if you're lucky, might be a meager bowl of porridge or some stale bread. The food from the previous harvest is beginning to run low, and you know that the long winter months will only bring more scarcity. The livestock, too, are suffering, their coats matted with frost as they huddle together in the barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge out into the snow to gather what firewood you can. It's back-breaking work, and your hands quickly become raw and chapped from the cold. But you know that without a fire, your family will not survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in medieval times, a constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival that consumed every waking hour. And yet, even in the face of such hardship, there were moments of resilience and even joy to be found. You see, the medieval world was one deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. The biting cold was more than just a physical torment. It was a relentless presence that gnawed at the spirit. For those fortunate few like young Newton, the frost's grip brought a strange sanctuary, a chance to retreat inward, to dream and to create. But for the masses, winter was a cruel test of endurance, where every frozen breath was a reminder of vulnerability, every shiver a call to survive. Feel the weight of that chill pressing against your very bones as you share the cramped, smoky space with those you love. The silence, broken only by the soft, desperate breaths of your children seeking warmth beside you. Hunger gnaws silently, and yet hope flickers dimly, like the weak flame in your hearth, fragile but unyielding. In the icy stillness, community and faith became lifelines. Stories were shared, songs sung, hands joined, each small act a rebellion against the overwhelming cold. Even as frost formed on the window panes and snow piled high, human warmth endured. It was in this crucible of hardship that the medieval soul was forged, steadfast, connected, and quietly courageous. The passing of the seasons was marked not just by changes in the weather, but by a rich tapestry of rituals and celebrations. And so, even in the depths of winter, there were glimmers of light to be found. One such beacon was the midwinter feast of St. Stephen, held each year on December 26th. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned on their head, with a peasant or serf being crowned the lord of misrule for the day. This lucky individual would preside over a raucous celebration filled with food, drink, and revelry, a rare moment of indulgence in an otherwise austere existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope in the medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship took on a profound importance. Imagine, if you will, a small village huddled against the snow. The smoke from the chimneys mingles with the leaden sky, a sign of life amidst the barren landscape. Inside the homes, families crowd together around the hearth, telling stories and sharing what meager scraps of food they have. There is a sense of unity here, a shared sense of purpose in the face of hardship. Neighbors trudge through the snow to check on each other, bringing extra firewood or a pot of stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces are lined with weariness, but also with a quiet determination. They have survived winters past, and they will survive this one too. And so the long, cold months march on, the snow piling higher and the ice growing thicker with each passing day. But even in the darkest depths of winter, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon. For the people of medieval times knew that no matter how brutal the season, spring would come again. They watched for the first signs with a keen and practiced eye, the slight lengthening of the days, the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when at last the thaw began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence that we can scarcely imagine today. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. The ploughs that had lain idle for so long were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies. Beneath the cold, harsh exterior of medieval winter, lay a heartbeat of humanity that refused to be silenced. Every flicker of firelight, every shared morsel, and every whispered story in the cold darkness was a testament to resilience and hope. The Feast of St. Stephen was more than just a day of chaos and revelry. It was a lifeline, a moment where joy dared to bloom amid struggle. Picture the villagers' faces, weathered by wind and frost, yet softening in laughter and camaraderie, if only for a brief hour. The snow may have wrapped the world in white silence, but the warmth of community echoed loud and true, a promise that no one was alone in the long winter night. And as the days slowly lengthened, as the frost began to yield beneath the first cautious shoots of green, the people's spirits lifted with it. The ritual of Plough Monday was more than a blessing for the land. It was a blessing for the souls of those who tilled it, a declaration that life would endure, that the wheel of seasons would turn once more, and with it, the hope of a new beginning. A symbol of the renewed cycle of life. As the first furrows were carved into the waiting earth, the air itself seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief and gratitude. Life had been relentless, yes, bitterly harsh and unforgiving at times, but through every cruel trial, they endured. Through the long, dark winter nights, through gnawing hunger and biting cold, through the ever-present shadow of uncertainty, the people of medieval Europe clung fiercely to the fragile promise of spring. And now, as the frozen ground softened and tender green shoots pushed bravely towards the sun's warming rays, that promise blossomed into reality. It is a resilience almost unfathomable in our modern world of ease and convenience. To face such ceaseless hardship, year after unforgiving year, is nearly beyond our imagining. Yet, there is a profound humility in knowing that our ancestors did exactly that. They confronted the brutal truths of their existence with a strength and courage that still resonates across the centuries. They found glimmers of hope in the deepest darkness and moments of joy in the simplest blessings. Through their perseverance, they bequeathed us a legacy of endurance, a whisper of human spirit that refuses to break. So, the next time you find yourself shivering in the grip of a cold winter's day, pause for a moment and remember those who walked this path before you. Remember their struggles and their triumphs, their tears and their laughter. Above all, remember the unyielding human spirit that carried them through the harshest winters with unshaken faith. Because in the end, perhaps the greatest lesson the medieval world offers is this. No matter how long the night, no matter how fierce the cold wind, the promise of spring is always waiting just beyond the horizon. And with that, dear listener, we reach the close of our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope these stories of hardship and resilience have shed new light on your own experience of the season. May you always find warmth and solace in the embrace of family and community, just as our ancestors did so many centuries ago. May the promise of spring illuminate your path through even the coldest nights. Thank you for sharing this cozy corner of history with me. And remember, if you enjoyed our time together tonight, please subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales waiting to be discovered. But for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As winter's brutal grip tightened its icy fingers around medieval society, not even the most privileged could escape its merciless wrath. In cold, drafty castles built more for show than comfort, the royal households wrestled with an unrelenting foe, the biting, unforgiving cold. These ancient stone walls, meant to shield and protect, often felt like prisons sealing in the chill rather than keeping it out. The sheer scale of survival during winter was staggering. Mountains of firewood had to be painstakingly gathered and stockpiled to feed the roaring hearths, the sole lifeline against the creeping frost. In kitchens dimly lit by flickering flames, exhausted staff labored endlessly, preserving precious meats, grains, and root vegetables that would have to last through the long months when fresh food was a forgotten dream. Servants moved hurriedly, sealing every crack and crevice, desperate to keep the invisible enemy of cold at bay. Yet, despite their tireless efforts, winter's assault was relentless and cruel. Among the many haunting stories whispered through history is that of a medieval queen, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, whose life was claimed not by the battlefield or plague, but by the very cold within the walls meant to protect her. On a merciless January morning in 1326, she was discovered frozen in her own bed, a tragic victim of exposure. Such grim fates cast a heavy shadow over the medieval winter. Death loomed in the biting air and the darkness that stretched endlessly. And yet, even in this bleak desolation, the human spirit refused to break. Amidst the bitter cold and hardship, a fragile ember of hope glimmered for many in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen. Celebrated on December 26th, this midwinter festival was a precious oasis in the desert of peasant toil and deprivation. For a fleeting day, the harshness of life softened. Laughter and song momentarily replaced hunger and hardship. At the heart of this feast lay the tradition of misrule, a joyous, chaotic inversion of the strict social order. For just one day, a commoner was crowned the Lord of Misrule, granted the power to command in jest, to turn the world upside down and mock the rulers. This playful rebellion was no mere frivolity. It was a vital release valve for the pent-up frustrations born from the grinding inequality and harshness of feudal life. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred, if only for a day. The poor and the proud dined side by side, shared games, and reveled together as equals in laughter and revelry. This shared humanity, this brief moment of unity, was more than a celebration. It was a lifeline, a crucial balm for weary souls battered by winter's cruelty. The bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries were not mere fleeting moments. They were lifelines, fragile threads weaving warmth into the cold fabric of medieval winter life. Imagine two peasant families in 1377, neighbors whose scant provisions had long since run dry, facing the terrifying brink of starvation. In a world stripped of comforts and promises, they gathered what little remained, tattered, threadbare, but fiercely precious, and shared a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That simple act of generosity, born from desperation, yet brimming with compassion, became their beacon of hope. It was more than food. It was a sacred gesture of unity that infused them with the strength to endure the bitter months ahead. In those harsh winters when frost-bitten travelers reached out for a helping hand, or when a shivering widow received an extra log to fuel her hearth, such kindnesses were the difference between fading into darkness and clinging to life. Winter's harsh grip was merciless, yet it also cultivated an unspoken bond among people, a shared resolve to survive through mutual reliance. This culture of interdependence rose above the rigid social divides of the time, proving that even in the coldest despair, warmth could be found in togetherness. But as the endless winter stretched on, even these moments of fellowship were fleeting flames against the relentless cold. The Feast of Stephen was a brief spark of light, a few hours of joy and relief amid the long, grueling darkness of January, February, and March. Stores grew emptier, hunger gnawed deeper, and the chill seeped past the stoutest fires. The distant promise of spring's renewal felt like a fading dream, almost impossible to hold on to. And yet, year after year, the medieval people endured. Through relentless hardship, through battles with cold and scarcity, they survived, upheld by an iron will forged in winter's merciless crucible. As the earth lay silent and the sun hid behind gray skies, they somehow found within themselves the stubborn tenacity to press on. Imagine the surge of profound relief and joy when at last signs of winter's retreat appeared. A subtle softening in the air, a few precious extra minutes of daylight, the hopeful drip of melting icicles surrendering to the sun's gentle strength. After months of endless struggle, these tiny victories must have felt nothing short of miraculous. For the weary farmers, no day was more eagerly awaited than Plough Monday, the symbolic start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany, it signaled the thawing soil and the stirring of life beneath the frost. Though winter still held its icy grip, the ritual of Plough Monday was a tangible promise, a talisman of hope that the relentless cold would soon loosen and spring would come again. Picture the patchwork of fields slowly shedding their snowy shrouds as draft animals strained into the earth's first furrows, turning the frozen ground toward renewal and rebirth. This was the moment when endurance met hope, and life, fragile yet fierce, began to stir once more. With every sod upturned, reaching toward the strengthening sun, medieval man struck a defiant blow against winter's retreating reign. A silent declaration of unwavering persistence amid nature's cruel whims. Today, cocooned within our modern sanctuaries of central heating and electric blankets, stocked pantries, and steadfast infrastructure, it is almost impossible to grasp the vast reservoir of courage and endurance demanded by the relentless brutality of a medieval winter. From our insulated bubbles, where a delayed flight or a rain-soaked commute spark mere irritation, the true depth of winter's suffering in ages past feels almost unfathomable. Yet, when we grumble over these trivial discomforts, perhaps we should pause and reflect on the profound misery borne year after year by those who face the endless frost and biting cold with nothing but sheer willpower. What immense wells of resilience and stubborn tenacity they had to summon just to survive each merciless season. Their ability to carve out fleeting moments of joy, celebration, and human connection amid ceaseless hardship borders on the heroic. An echo of strength that modern minds struggle to comprehend. That they not only survived winter's ruthless grasp, but found glimmers of hope and light within the overwhelming darkness speaks to an indomitable spirit lying dormant within each of us, waiting for life's harsh trials to awaken it. So next time we feel the prick of modern annoyance, let us cast our thoughts back to those icy struggles of our ancestors. In their memory, may we find the courage to awaken our own hidden reserves of grit and endurance. And as we sink gratefully into our warm beds tonight, let us spare a thought for the countless souls who braved winter's bitter siege, armed with nothing but will, fellowship, and an unyielding flame of hope. As the new year broke and the revelry of Plough Monday faded into the cold air, medieval life slipped back into its familiar, harsh rhythm. Short, frigid days merged with long, frost-bitten nights. The fortunate huddled in the smoky warmth of scantily heated hovels and drafty manors. For many others, winter was a relentless battle against nature's fury, each day a test of survival. Among the cruelest winter trials was the looming shadow of sickness. In cramped, unsanitary quarters, disease spread with terrifying speed. The common cold, though now trivial, was then a torment, leaving sufferers with red-rimmed eyes and aching bodies. Far worse were the invisible enemies, virulent influenza outbreaks that mercilessly threw towns and villages, striking young and old alike with fever, chills, and relentless pain. In an era before vaccines or effective medicine, these flu epidemics could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 stands as a grim testament, with a deadly strain sweeping across Europe and claiming over 10,000 lives in Paris alone. Pneumonia, the silent predator, preyed on those weakened by hunger or disease, stealing breath and life in the coldest of seasons. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphaned children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife Jane Seymour to postnatal complications, likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London in the 1500s, fully half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes. The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those of limited means, even the basic comforts of shelter, food, and warmth could not be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing the gathering of fallen timbers from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving to eke out some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and the first shy greenery of spring was still months away. Cái lạnh âm ẩm của mùa đông không chỉ làm thấm sâu vào từng ngóc ngách của căn nhà, mà còn thấm thía vào tận sâu trong từng phổi người dân. Mỗi hơi thở trở nên nặng nề, như thể từng giọt nước âm thầm ngập đầy, dần dần nhấn chìm họ trong cơn thở ngạt không thể tránh khỏi. Những không gian sống chật chội, nghẹt thở không chỉ giam giữ thân xác mà còn là ổ dịch lý tưởng cho căn bệnh viêm phổi lan tràn khắp nơi, cuốn đi mạng sống của bao người thân yêu, để lại sau lưng những đứa trẻ mồ côi, những gia đình tan vỡ trong nỗi đau khôn nguôi. Không chỉ những người nghèo khổ, mà cả giới quý tộc cũng không thể thoát khỏi bàn tay tàn nhẫn của dịch bệnh mùa đông. Những lâu đài nguy nga tráng lệ vốn là biểu tượng của quyền lực và sự bảo vệ, thực ra là nơi bệnh tật lây lan chóng mặt nhất bởi dòng người qua lại liên tục. Một vị khách hay người hành hương vô tình trở thành kẻ mang theo tử thần đến từng góc nhỏ. Cái chết thương tâm của Jane Seymour, người vợ được Henry VIII yêu quý, như một minh chứng đau đớn cho sự tàn bạo của thời đại thiếu thốn vệ sinh, nơi mà sinh mạng con người quá mong manh trước những hiểm họa vô hình. Những đứa trẻ, những sinh linh bé nhỏ là những nạn nhân bất lực nhất trong cuộc chiến sinh tồn ấy. Thời tiết khắc nghiệt, thức ăn ít ỏi và điều kiện vệ sinh tồi tệ đan xen khiến mùa đông trở thành một kẻ thù không khoan nhượng với sự sống non nớt. Ở London, thế kỷ 16, có tới một nửa số trẻ em không thể sống quá 5 tuổi, như những ngọn nến nhỏ bị gió lạnh thổi tắt trước khi kịp cháy sáng. Tập tục bone lace, chiếc duy băng đen buộc trên tay những em bé bệnh nặng, một vật nhỏ bé nhưng chứa đựng nỗi đau lớn lao, là minh chứng thấm thía nhất cho bi kịch ấy. Chiếc duy băng ấy, nếu đứa trẻ không qua khỏi, sẽ trở thành dấu hiệu gắn vào tấm vải liệm, nhắc nhở tất cả về cái giá đắt của mùa đông trên những sinh mệnh thuần khiết nhất. Với những người nghèo khó, mùa đông là cuộc chiến không khoan nhượng để tồn tại. Sự thiếu thốn về lửa ấm, thức ăn, nơi trú chân trở thành ám ảnh thường trực. Lửa sưởi vốn là nguồn sống, phải kiếm tìm trong những thứ cằn cỗi nhất, rơm rạ, phân khô, bởi gỗ rừng được kiểm soát nghiêm ngặt. Gia đình nông dân quây quần bên đống lửa tàn héo, cố gắng níu giữ từng tia hơi ấm mong manh giữa cái giá lạnh tê tái. Đàn gia súc run rẩy bên cạnh, hơi thở bốc thành làn khói trắng giữa không khí lạnh lẽo, như cùng chia sẻ nỗi khốn cùng của con người. Thức ăn dần cạn kiệt, chỉ còn lại những miếng thịt muối, đậu khô, bánh mì thô ráp. Tất cả đều không đủ để khỏa lấp cái đói, cái rét và nỗi cô đơn của những tháng ngày dài vô tận. Mùa thu, mùa gặt hái no đủ như một ký ức xa xăm, và mùa xuân với những mầm xanh e ấp thì vẫn còn xa tít mù khơi. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some very dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor. Tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields too numerous for proper burial. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down with the knowledge that things would likely get worse before they got better. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment took on the unmistakable stamp of the season. The sheer drudgery of scratching out an existence in the bitter cold colored all aspects of life. Socially, winter was a time of drawing in and relying on the bonds of family and community. The cheery gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, People looked inward for amusement and enrichment during the long, dark evenings. Telling stories and singing songs helped to while away the hours. The flickering light of rushlights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. With idle hands seen as the devil's playground, industriousness was more necessity than virtue. Winter's confinement at least provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to curl up with a good book, although this was a rather exclusive club. In England, at the close of the 15th century, a humble tradesman's library might boast a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps some merry jests or tales of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the lavishly illuminated volumes so prized by bibliophiles. Imagine the relentless cold biting through tattered clothing, the gnawing hunger that sharpens with each passing day, and the bleak horizon offering no promise but survival itself. Foraging wasn't a mere chore. It was a desperate quest for life amid desolation. Those nettles, garlic, and mushrooms, humble as they were, became tokens of hope, fragile morsels that whispered of endurance. Picture families gathered around sparse, flavorless pottages, the steaming bowls more a balm to the soul than a feast for the palate. Each mouthful a reminder of both the hardship endured and the fragile thread holding life together until the cruel grasp of winter loosened. For many, even this daily sustenance was snatched away by cruel fate. Storms drowning crops, pests devouring fields, and the merciless Great Famine turning communities into ghostly echoes of themselves. The harrowing tales of that famine haunt us still. The unimaginable desperation driving people to consume what should never be eaten, the tragic mercy killings of starving children, and the overwhelming presence of death. It's a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability, but also of its fierce will to cling to life against unbearable odds. Yet, winter was more than just hunger and hardship. It was a season that etched itself deep into the culture and spirit of the medieval world. The cold confined bodies, but called communities closer, sharing stories by candlelight, weaving dreams into the fabric of long nights. Those flickering flames held more than light. They carried warmth, memory, and connection in a world often cold and dark. In these moments, the spirit's quiet resistance glimmered, in the industrious hands crafting goods to stave off idleness, in the voices weaving tales that kindled hope, and in the rare luxury of turning pages by firelight, imagining worlds beyond the frozen landscape outside. Winter was harsh, unyielding, and often cruel. Yet within it lay a strange beauty. The resilience of human spirit, the sanctity of family bonds, and the quiet courage to endure until the first green shoots of spring promised renewal once more. Those who could read often did so aloud for the benefit and entertainment of the whole household. In the biting cold and endless gray of winter, voices rose together like a warm hearth, carrying treasured stories of brave knights, clever tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. Winter was more than just a season. It was a sanctuary where tales of chivalry and honor blossomed in the hearts of listeners. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court, with their intricate plots and noble themes, were perennial favorites. They didn't just entertain, they lifted weary souls, whisking listeners far beyond the cramped, frost-bitten walls of their refuge, reminding them that courage and hope endured even in the darkest times. Yet, winter's monotony often demanded other forms of escape. Less wholesome entertainments flickered like sparks in the long nights. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, its sharp clatter echoing through taverns and great halls alike. Each throw carried the weight of desperation and desire, igniting heated tempers and emptying purses. The sound of knucklebones rattling and dice tumbling was the soundtrack to fleeting fortunes and dashed dreams. And then there was drink, the fermented comfort of ale, mead, and wine. These were more than mere liquids. They were warmth captured in a cup, a fleeting shield against the relentless chill. Public houses overflowed with laughter, songs, and camaraderie, offering fleeting moments of joy and connection amid isolation. Yet, as spirits rose, so did tongues loosen, boundaries faded, and the occasional brawl would erupt. Raw, human reminders that beneath the cold, emotions simmered just as fiercely. But winter also invited a quieter, more profound journey inward. The short, dark days wrapped themselves around souls yearning for solace and meaning. The church's presence was a steady beacon in the medieval mind, guiding hearts closer to God during the long season of stillness. With the fields lying fallow, time stretched to allow prayer, penance, and acts of goodness to flourish. The joyous nativity plays of Christmastide softened into somber devotions as people turned their gaze inward and upward. As the frost deepened, some embarked on pilgrimages to sacred places, braving biting winds and treacherous roads, not merely out of duty, but from a deep, aching need for spiritual renewal. Others sat in hushed churches, their fingers numbed by cold as they traced the worn beads of rosaries, meditating on the eternal, fragile nature of the soul. In these harsh times, charity shone as a vital lifeline. The 7 acts of corporal mercy formed a sacred blueprint for kindness: feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. Amid scarcity and suffering, even the smallest acts of human compassion carried immense weight, offering warmth that no fire could match. Yet winter's cruel grip also unearthed the darker shades of human nature. Desperation clawed at hearts and minds, pushing some towards crime as survival became a daily battle. The close quarters of long nights frayed tempers, sparking violence that spilled beyond whispered threats. Assaults and theft rose like bitter frost across the land, and the medieval justice system, overwhelmed and crude, struggled helplessly against this surge of lawlessness. The season's chill did not just freeze the earth, it sometimes froze the bonds of community, revealing how fragile human resilience could be. Trials were often postponed, held hostage to the whims of the weather. The accused, forgotten in cold, damp, and overcrowded jails, waited in despair for days, sometimes weeks. Justice, delayed, was a bitter torment. Punishments handed down could be cruel and unforgiving. Fines that stripped already meager savings, floggings that tore flesh and spirit, and executions that silenced voices forever. Yet even amid winter's bleakest shadows, the human spirit refused to be extinguished. In those darkest, coldest nights, people clung to fragile sparks of joy and fleeting moments of laughter. The distant hope of spring's return was a lantern guiding them through the endless frost. February's lengthening days brought a fragile warmth, an oasis amid the chill, through the feast of St. Valentine on the 14th. What began as an ancient pagan fertility rite had, through the touch of Christianity, blossomed into a celebration of love embraced with fervor by the medieval people. This festival was a bright ember of tenderness and warmth, burning at the very heart of winter's icy grip. By the 15th century, the custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was a cherished tradition. Young men and women would gather eagerly, reaching into a bowl to draw slips of paper that would bind them, at least in spirit, for the coming year. These ritual pairings sparked merry flirtations and sometimes blossomed into marriages that would outlast even the coldest winters. Tokens of affection, flowers, sweets, hand-penned verses were exchanged like precious gifts, each one a fragile proof that love could thrive even in the harshest conditions. A simple handmade card delivered with shy hope could set hearts racing and spirits soaring. Despite the biting cold and hardships, the fires of love flickered stubbornly, refusing to be snuffed out by winter's cruel breath. As St. Valentine's Day faded into the solemn season of Lent, austerity tightened its grip. Yet with it came a quiet certainty. The worst was behind them. Nature herself offered reassurance. Snowdrops and crocuses, delicate and brave, pierced the frozen earth, tangible signs that winter's icy reign was loosening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless turning of the seasons shaped every heartbeat of life, and no season left a mark so profound as winter. It was a time of scarcity and suffering, when the simple act of survival was a victory. Yet it was also a testament to resilience and silent strength in the face of merciless elements. Medieval winter was more than just a season. It was a crucible testing faith, family bonds, and community ties. The sparkling icicles, frost-laden meadows, and snow-blanketed fields might paint a picturesque scene, but beneath the beauty lay hardship and endurance. This harsh season forged a people of extraordinary grit, those who could weather the deepest cold and still kindle hope for spring. The Middle Ages were carried forward by those who faced winter's worst with unyielding resolve and a stubborn belief in renewal. Perhaps there is no greater homage to their spirit than this. So the next time you grumble over a delayed train or slip on a patch of ice, pause and remember your medieval ancestors who endured far more and still dared to dream of warmer days. Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at their disposal, and they emerged victorious spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed. Thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it's done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than foe. As the weak winter sun struggled to pierce the lean gray clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and drew their meager cloaks tighter about their shoulders. The icy tendrils of winter's grasp seemed to creep into the very marrow of their bones, chilling them to the core. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that their ragged woolen garments, which felt so oppressively hot and sticky in the sweltering labors of summertime, now provided scarcely more warmth than a gossamer veil against winter's biting onslaught. They huddled together in their hovels, thankful for the meager heat thrown by a smoky fire, their breath misting in the chilly air. The animals felt winter's bite too. The elderly draft horse, ribs protruding beneath its shaggy coat, dreamed wistfully of the long-gone, lush summer grass as it ate its rationed wisp of hay. The milk cow lowed mournfully, teats chapped and raw in the frigid drafts that knifed through the barn walls. Even the way barn cats looked a bit less haughty, their usual disdain blunted by the gnawing in their bellies and the frost on their whiskers. Yes, winter was an especially trying time for the lowest rungs of medieval society. But even the nobility, cocooned in their grand, drafty castles, were far from immune to the deprivations of the season. Many a blue-blooded maiden wailed in despair as her priceless silk gowns proved useless against the dank chill of stone walls. The castle kitchens strained to concoct enough piping hot delicacies to stoke the noble innards. It is said that King Henry II of England, felled by a severe case of the winter shivers, just once burned an entire chair just to warm his royal posterior for a blessed moment or two. His servants despaired, knowing His Majesty's temper was liable to ignite even faster than the furniture if he remained uncomfortably cold for long. But for peasant and king alike, winter seemed to grind on interminably, an unrelenting slog of frozen misery. The only respite came from the occasional celebration or feast day, brief islands of revelry in the dark ocean of winter. The people seized upon these moments of light and levity, cherishing them like a drowning man gasping for air. Perhaps the most anticipated was the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th, a day of unbridled merriment and delightfully subversive reversals of fortune. By ancient tradition, a mere peasant was crowned the Lord of Misrule on this day, gleefully lording over his betters in a delicious bit of sanctioned rebellion. One can only imagine the raucous peals of laughter that rang out as the lowliest serf ordered about the local baron with mock imperiousness. For one glorious day, the normal rules and hierarchies fell away, and all reveled together as equals. The frigid drudgery of winter seemed to recede, driven back by the bright blaze of communal joy. But soon enough, the merry festivities would end. The misrule would be writhed, and the cold, hard reality of winter would descend once more. The people would trudge back to their hearths and their chores, the bite of the wind seeming to mock the fleeting warmth of fellowship. The battle against winter's grim siege resumed unabated. And yet, even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were quiet acts of courage and compassion that melted the frost from even the most careworn hearts. Neighbors shared scarce provisions with those even less fortunate, exhibiting a generosity of spirit that no cold could diminish. A certain Dame Matilda of York was said to have once given her only cloak to a poor beggar woman, shivering herself through the long walk home. When questioned why she would relinquish her one defense against the brutal cold, she simply smiled serenely and said, "The warmth of human kindness is a fire that never goes out." Such selflessness, such nobility of spirit was the secret weapon with which the medieval people armed themselves against winter's relentless battery. For though winter could freeze their fingers and toes, it could not touch the invincible summer that reigned eternal in their hearts. And so they endured. They persisted. They triumphed in their own way over the harshest of seasons. The first green buds of spring were far more than just a welcome sight. They were a living testament to the relentless tenacity of the human will, an indomitable spirit capable of outlasting even the harshest, darkest winters. As we curl deeper beneath our cozy electric blankets today, it's worth pausing to remember the fierce trials and hard-won triumphs of our medieval ancestors. In their ceaseless battle against the unforgiving elements, in their stubborn refusal to bow to nature's unpredictable fury, they forged a legacy of resilience, a flame that continues to warm our souls even now. Outside our modern windows, the chill winds of winter may still moan, but within us we carry the strength of those who braved bone-chilling cold, armed with little more than a threadbare cloak and an unquenchable human spirit. If they could survive such brutal seasons, surely we can hold on until spring comes once again. Spring at last. As winter's icy grip slowly loosened, medieval folk awaited the return of gentler days with eager hearts. They had endured months of bitter cold, cramped and huddled in their shelters, stomachs aching from meager winter rations. But now, as the sun hung a little longer in the sky each day, its rays glinting off melting snow, hope blossomed alongside the first shoots of green. Across the land, people emerged from their winter cocoons, blinking against the bright spring light like bears waking from a long slumber. Children burst forth from their homes, laughing with delight as fresh breezes kissed their cheeks, replacing the cruel bite of winter's wind. They raced through the squelching mud, marveling at the brave crocuses pushing petals through thawing earth. In the fields, farmers looked forward with anticipation to Plow Monday, the sacred start of the agricultural year. On the first Monday after Epiphany, the softened earth welcomed plows once more. Draft horses and oxen were hitched and paraded proudly through village streets, decked with garlands and ribbons in joyous celebration. Church bells rang out, their jubilant peals echoing the collective relief felt by all. Chimneys once again puffed steady smoke, no longer stifled beneath blankets of snow and ice. The threat of frostbite and winter illness slowly faded with the retreating snowbanks. Faces once worn with worry and hardship now softened into hopeful smiles. Soon, vibrant spring and summer harvests would replace the bland, preserved gruel and hard cheeses that had barely sustained them through those long, dark months. From our modern perspective, it may be hard to grasp the sheer significance of this seasonal turning. We may grumble about muddy roads or begrudge losing an hour to daylight savings. But for those who lived in medieval times, the arrival of spring was nothing less than life-affirming, a triumphant signal that they had survived winter's merciless assault, staving off hunger and disease for yet another year. The skeletal trees donning fresh green leaves were not just a sign of nature's rebirth, but a mirror to the renewed hope and strength stirring within every heart. Medieval people felt warmth and light return. Some of that elation can still be heard echoing through the ages in lively medieval folk tunes and verses that welcome spring's sweet return. One English song jauntily proclaimed, "Lud sing cuckoo, groweth seed and bloweth med, and springeth the W new sing cuckoo," which roughly translates to, "Loudly sing cuckoo, the seed is growing. The seed is growing, the meadow is blooming, and the wood is springing up a new sing cuckoo." The sheer irrepressible joy is palpable, spilling out in simple yet evocative rhyme. So let us take a moment to appreciate the immense fortitude, resilience, and zest for life embodied by our medieval ancestors. Through the harshest conditions imaginable, they endured, making it through each winter by the grit of their teeth and the bonds of their communities. And when spring sun and birdsong broke winter's oppressive silence at long last, they reveled wholeheartedly, knowing they had once again triumphed over nature's cruelty. As we nestle into our warm beds, perhaps grumbling half-heartedly about the chill outside our windows, we might spare a thought for those long-ago souls, the ones who would heave sighs of pure relief as the snow gave way to mud, flinging open their shutters and letting the spring air rush in, the ones who met winter's brutality with a tenacity and exuberant will to live that should humble us to this day. Let their strength be a reminder to us when we face our own bleak seasons, literally or metaphorically. If they could emerge from the depths of winter privation with such unabashed joy, then surely we too can find wellsprings of hope to sustain us. The thaw will come, the sun will return, and we will step out once more into the light. Voices joined in a resounding chorus of loud sing cuckoo. The blizzards and bitter frosts continued to torment the land, but medieval folk possessed a stubborn resilience. Even in the darkest depths of winter, they found ways to help each other weather the storm. Neighbors shared what meager food they had, taking turns hosting communal meals. Villages assigned young men to check on elderly widows, bringing them firewood and repairing their ramshackle huts. This quiet, steadfast solidarity was a lifeline, a thread weaving the fabric of community tighter, ensuring no one faced the cruelty of winter alone. Through shared hardship, they forged bonds that warmed their hearts more surely than any hearth. Their spirit, unbowed by snow or ice, shines through the ages, whispering to us across centuries. In togetherness, we find strength. In hope, we find survival. Agnes was one such widow, a frail, solitary figure whose bones ached fiercely in the bitter cold, and whose trembling hands struggled vainly to kindle a fire that refused to catch. The weight of loneliness pressed heavily on her, and hope seemed to slip away like the dwindling embers of a dying hearth. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a gentle knock echoed through her humble cottage door. It was Tom, a sturdy young lad from the village, his cheeks flushed ruddy from the biting wind. In his arms, he carried not only a bundle of logs, but also a sack of dried peas and a hunk of salted pork, offerings gathered from the generosity of other villagers. Tears streamed down Agnes's wrinkled cheeks, the warmth of gratitude mingling with the heat of the roaring fire Tom stoked into life. For the first time in weeks, warmth seeped back into her frail body, chasing away the relentless chill. In these harsh times, such acts of kindness were the fragile threads stitching the community together, reminders that compassion could pierce even the darkest winter. But generosity wasn't limited to the poor or the peasants. Lady Margaret, wife of the local earl, was renowned for her charitable spirit during the cold months. Though her castle's larders overflowed with stores, she insisted on sending wagons laden with grain and preserved foods to the poorest peasants within her husband's domain. Many of her noble peers mocked her, viewing the peasants as little more than beasts to be fed grudgingly. Why waste good food on them? They sneered. Yet Lady Margaret stood firm, bound by her Christian duty to care for those less fortunate. One particularly brutal winter brought famine crashing down on the region. Lady Margaret worked tirelessly to stretch the castle's provisions, ordering the kitchen to create hearty soups and stews to serve at the gates to the starving. The kitchen boys grumbled at the extra labor, but Bernard, the stout cook, shared his mistress's sense of noble obligation. He poured his heart into the task, stretching every last turnip and potato from the cellar into the thick gray broth, dotted with bits of mutton. The starving peasants slurped the soup gratefully, barely noticing the coarse bits beneath the surface. For many, it would be their only meal for days. As winter wore on, even Lady Margaret's coffers began to thin. Quietly, she sold some of her precious jewels and finery, trading them for supplies from neighboring towns. Her husband, the Earl, worried but chose to respect his wife's piety, understanding that her sacrifices could protect others even at their own risk. The church also played a crucial role in these desperate times. Monasteries flung open their heavy doors to the poor and sick, offering warm pallets of straw to rest on and simple meals of bread and ale. Some even ran rudimentary hospitals, caring for those frostbitten and gravely ill. The monks saw this as their sacred calling, striving to embody the selfless compassion of Christ. Brother William, a young novice, tended to the sick at his monastery's hospital. Though the sights and smells of sickness and decay churned his stomach, he pressed on, ladling broth into the mouths of toothless elders, changing pus-soaked bandages with gentle hands. He prayed for the strength to endure this trial, silently thanking God that his humble station shielded him from the harshest blows of winter's cruelty. In these intertwined stories of Agnes, Tom, Lady Margaret, Bernard, and Brother William, we see the tapestry of a world where survival was not merely a matter of endurance, but of shared humanity, where acts of kindness, no matter how small, became the very lifeblood of a community bound by compassion amidst the unyielding cold. For winter was the great equalizer, wielding its icy scythe without favor, felling rich and poor alike beneath its merciless sweep. Yes, the wealthy could wrap themselves in thicker woolens and indulge in luxuries like hot mulled wine, But even they could not escape the shivers that rattled through drafty manors, nor the gnawing worry over dwindling stores. Death did not discriminate. It crept in silently as winter-born disease, claiming noble and commoner alike. Lady Isabel, a noblewoman heavy with child, was confined to her chamber during a particularly cruel cold snap. Surrounded by every comfort, a roaring hearth, thick furs piled high, maids at her beck and call, she should have been shielded from harm. Yet illness has a way of slipping past even the stoutest castle walls. When a kitchen girl, coughing harshly, brought her a posset of warm milk and herbs, none suspected the danger within. Days later, Lady Isabel was burning with fever, her breath rattling in her chest. The child came too soon, a fragile wisp who never drew breath. By the end of the week, Lady Isabel herself was gone. Even the king was not immune to winter's grasp. Henry VI, gentle and devout, fretted over the suffering of his people during the bitter winter of 1433. His physicians prescribed cinnamon and ginger tonics to combat the cold humors, yet still melancholy engulfed him. No fire's heat could thaw the chill that gripped his hands. Whispers claimed it was divine punishment for his failings, but in truth, the shadow of seasonal despair fell equally on kings and serfs alike. As days lengthened and winter's clenched fist finally began to loosen, hearts dared to dream of spring's arrival. They prayed for the thawing earth and the first tentative buds that would break from skeletal branches. The great wheel of the farming year stirred once more, and with it came the celebration of Plough Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany. This sacred day marked the cutting of the first symbolic furrow into the frost-speckled soil, a hopeful sign of crops yet to come. Village men blackened their faces with soot for luck, parading through muddy lanes with plowshares raised high, singing raucous songs to awaken the sleeping earth. Revelry followed, dancing, hearty feasts, and the generous quaffing of ale. It was a solemn promise, a sacred covenant that winter's dark days were waning and brighter tomorrows awaited. This eternal cycle echoed through every corner of society. In the great halls of dukes and countesses, minstrels struck up lively tunes and couples spun into carol dances, hearts buoyed by the optimism of a new year. The king hosted a lavish feast, tables groaning under delicacies, roast swan, marchpane sweets, fit for royalty. Even humble Giles, a poor peasant, felt a burden lift as he stepped out onto his modest plot. Clutching a pouch of precious saved seed, the promise of future abundance, he breathed easier. Nearby, Agnes, a wretched widow once at death's door, stirred a bubbling pot of pottage, humming softly to herself, a fragile melody of hope in the lengthening days. She had made it through winter's gauntlet to see another spring dawn. Praise be to God. Winter was brutal. There was no escaping that fact. It brought with it a host of miseries and hardships, from hunger to bone-chilling cold to the constant specter of death and disease. But it was also a time when the true resilience and communal spirit of medieval people shone through. Staring into the abyss of winter bleakness, they responded with generosity, with grit, and even with defiant celebration. They understood that winter was an inescapable part of the great cycle of life. The best way to conquer the cold was to hunker down and endure it together. So, as you huddle beneath your cozy duvet, perhaps grumbling about the exorbitant heating bill or scraping a bit of frost from your windshield, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Reflect on how they survived winter after winter in a world before electric blankets, central heating, and grocery deliveries at the click of a button. Though our modern winter woes may seem all-consuming in the moment, they pale in comparison to what medievals faced each year. Perhaps we could learn a lesson from them. That empathy, charity, and an irrepressible hope for spring are the best ways to weather the hardships life throws our way. Whether it be a polar vortex or a pandemic, let us all embrace the coming spring with a full and grateful heart, knowing that however deep the snow drifts, it will eventually yield to the warming sun. The harshness of winter only makes the blossoming of spring all the sweeter. And so, as a medieval king might say, let us winter bravely so that we may spring eternally. Frost crackles underfoot as you trudge through snowdrifts, breath clouding in the icy air. Icicles glitter in the pale sunlight, hanging from the eaves of Lee and Dorb huts. The village lies hushed and still, huddled against winter's onslaught. This is what winter looked like for most of our medieval ancestors, not the cozy scenes we imagine of merry feasts and snug castles decked with holly and buzzing with music and laughter. No, for the vast majority, winter was a time of bone-chilling cold, gnawing hunger, and grim survival. The specter of winter hunger was never far away. With crops withered and livestock scarce, putting food on the table became a daily battle. Grain stores dwindled, and bitter herbs and shriveled turnips were soon all that stood between a family and starvation. One bitterly cold winter in 1315, a medieval Englishman's harvest fell short by a third due to storms and freezing weather. The desperate serfs were reduced to eating the straw roofs off their huts and boiling the leather from their shoes, all the while still forced to labor for their lofty lords. Malnutrition weakened the body's defenses against winter maladies. The common cold could quickly morph into life-threatening pneumonia or bronchitis. Influenza cut through villages like a scythe, felling young and old alike as they shivered in their shabby shelters. With teeth chattering, medieval folk huddled together against the chill, packing into the relative warmth of shuttered houses. Yet, this close-quartered coziness came at a cost. The stale, smoky air, ripe with the odor of unwashed bodies, festering chamber pots and dirty rushes, was a breeding ground for disease. In one 14th century Suffolk household, 13 family members, from grandparents to babes in arms, along with their scrawny chickens and mangy dogs, huddled together in a single tiny smokehouse all winter. It's incredible that any emerged alive come spring. Sickness was not the only danger lurking in the long, dark nights. Fires were a constant threat in packed wooden cities and towns. One misdirected spark could swiftly grow into a furious blaze, hungrily devouring tightly clustered buildings and snuffing out lives. The Great Fire of London in 1212 started on a cold November night, quickly raging through the city's cramped lanes while water froze in the pipes. An estimated 3,000 huddling Londoners perished in the flames, and many more were left homeless in winter's icy grip. Travel was especially treacherous in these frigid months. Roads dissolved into muddy quagmires, while blizzards obscured the way with blinding flurries. With daylight scarce, travelers risked becoming disoriented and losing their way, stumbling from the path to a frozen grave. In 1311, the English Queen Isabella set out from Canterbury for London as the winter twilight deepened on the shortened day. Her party lost the road and wandered helplessly until the early hours, while the pregnant queen wept copiously in fear and exhaustion. Winter's onslaught was no less punishing for working animals. Horses and oxen grew gaunt and weak on scant winter feed. Their labored breaths smoked in the chill air as they hauled logs and packs through knee-deep snow. Frostbite blackened extremities and ice-cracked hooves and wheel spokes alike. Yet, even in the bleak depths of winter, medieval people found slivers of light. The Feast of St. Stephen, or Boxing Day as we know it today, was a time of charity and goodwill. Alms boxes in churches overflowed with offerings for the poor, while lords supplied hearty meals to cold and hungry tenants. The Lord of Misrule tradition brought a spark of subversive festivity to the darkest days. A lowly peasant jester or deacon would be crowned king and preside over merry revels marked by drunkenness, role reversals, and mischief. A temporary upending of the established order. Despite the privations and dangers medieval winters posed, hope somehow endured, etched in frosty breaths, and no doubt uttered as fervent prayers. Hope that the weak and ailing would survive, that food would last until spring, that light and warmth would conquer the constricting cold once more. So this winter, when you grumble about shoveling the driveway, curse at the thermostat, or get chilled waiting for the bus, spare a thought for those who came before us. Our medieval ancestors faced the Herculean task of surviving winter after winter, with few of the comforts we take for granted. Their quiet courage in the face of winter's cruelty is perhaps the greatest lesson they have to teach us. Though we will never know most of their names or stories, we can appreciate the magnitude of their struggles and find inspiration in their endurance that saw them through to brighter days. The bitter frost continued its icy reign, transforming the landscape into a crystalline wonderland that would be picturesque if not for the immense hardship it inflicted on the inhabitants of the land. The snow fell ceaselessly from the ash-gray sky, blanketing the countryside in a suffocating white shroud. Icicles hung like glittering daggers from the eaves of peasant hovels and grand manors alike. The hearth fires that burned day and night offered only a fleeting respite from the penetrating chill. Smoke from the precious flames stung watering eyes and choked lungs in the close, fetid air of wattle and daub huts. There, huddled bodies crammed together for warmth, humans and livestock alike, the pungent aromas of dung and unwashed flesh mingling together into a uniquely medieval winter perfume. For some, however, even this dubious comfort was a luxury they could ill afford. Scant food stores stretched precariously thin, and bellies rumbled with the persistent pangs of hunger. Many of the poorest subsisted on little more than coarse bread and thin gruel, praying they would survive to see the spring. The specter of famine lingered in every home, from lowly serf to high lord. None could escape winter's deadly grasp, not even those who wore crowns. In drafty stone castles that seemed to inhale the cold and exhale an unrelenting damp, rulers shivered beneath mountains of furs. Royal households required vast amounts of firewood and provisions to ride out the long winter months. Woe to the kingdom whose sovereign failed to plan ahead. According to one account, a medieval Bohemian princess perished from the cold in her bedchamber. Her demise was a chilling reminder that wealth and status offered only partial protection from the elements. But for a peasant family, the loss of a loved one to winter's icy scythe was all too common, an occurrence as cruel as it was predictable. Disease added a cruel layer to winter's already relentless toll. Agues and fevers swept like wildfire through weakened communities, ravaged by hunger and cramped into squalid, suffocating quarters. The stale, smoke-choked air of hovels clung heavy and foul, making fragile lungs easy prey for infection. Medieval physicians, armed with remedies steeped more in superstition than true healing, were powerless to stem the tide of sickness and death. Outside, treacherous roads, slick with snowdrifts and treacherous black ice, turned travel into a perilous gamble. Only the desperate or the foolhardy dared venture beyond the meager safety of their homes during the darkest months. Journeys, even short ones, became trials by ice and cold, fraught with danger. Peddlers' carts sat idle, leaving isolated villages cut off from essential goods and supplies. The unpaid tithes and taxes bred frustration among lords and clergy, their coffers left empty by the biting grip of winter. And armies? The brutal chill and snow-choked roads tested even the toughest warriors. Supply lines stretched thin, strained by the unforgiving weather, threatening the very survival of campaigns. Yet from this harsh crucible emerged moments of astonishing resilience. The winter of 1407 saw a legendary clash in the high mountain passes where the formidable Welsh rebel leader Owain Glyndŵr faced the superior forces of the future King Henry V. Glyndŵr's men, hardened by the merciless cold, lured the English into a blinding blizzard trap. Burdened by heavy armor and unprepared for the winter's wrath, the English forces crumbled and fled, many succumbing to exposure in the frozen wasteland. Glyndŵr's stunning victory, born as much from the icy fury of winter as from Welsh courage and cunning, has echoed through history ever since, a testament to the unforgiving power of the season and the indomitable spirit of those who endured it. Medieval winters were also shadowed by devastating famines, claiming countless lives in their wake. When the cold lingered too long and spring planting was delayed, hunger quickly followed. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, ignited by an unseasonably wet and cold spring that drowned seedlings beneath sodden earth, plunged much of Europe into starvation and despair. One failure bled into another over the following years, leaving crops barren and tables empty. In England, bread prices soared to 20 times their usual cost. Desperation drove people to unimaginable acts, eating grass, roots, even stripping bark from trees. Bands of starving scavengers, driven beyond reason, dug into graves in search of sustenance, consuming the dead in a grim testament to human endurance. Cities like Ypres and Bruges, in what is now Belgium, saw a staggering toll, with estimates that a quarter or even a third of their populations perished in the cold grip of famine and disease. Winter's cruelty was a ruthless judge, and its sentence was often death. In the French town of Tournai, a citizen wrote in his diary that the poor were eating dogs, horses, and other unclean things. The misery was compounded by crime and disease as malnourished citizens turned to theft and violence to survive. One heartrending account from the St. Mary's Abbey Chronicles relates the fate of a starving woman imprisoned for stealing a loaf of bread. The woman was pregnant and starving, but the baker would give her no bread, so she stole a loaf and was caught. The judges would not pardon her, so she was hanged. As she died, the infant fell from her womb before the eyes of the people. The child lay bloody and screaming on the ground, but no one wanted to touch or rescue it, and the baby soon died where it fell. The famine finally eased in 1318, when the weather turned favorable again and crops began to grow. But the specter of starvation stalked the land every winter, ready to reap a grim harvest at the slightest adversity. For medieval people, winter was always a time of nagging unease, if not outright terror, as they prayed their meager food stores would last until spring. Malnutrition weakened the populace and left them vulnerable to disease. The close, unsanitary living conditions of winter led to frequent outbreaks of infections like influenza, dysentery, and pneumonia. Respiratory illnesses especially took a heavy toll. This is spread by coughing in stale, smoky air as people huddled around fires. Something as simple as a winter cold could quickly turn deadly in the Middle Ages. Even the doctors of the era were of little help, relying on dubious treatments like bleeding and purging with laxatives to restore the balance of a patient's humors. The Emperor Charlemagne allegedly died of pneumonia in the bitter winter of 814 after his doctors treated him with pus and urine to no avail. Many historians believe the Black Death of the 14th century spread so quickly because malnourished citizens packed together in winter quarters had little resistance to the disease. The 1348 to 1349 outbreak killed a staggering 30 to 60% of Europe's population. One poignant tale comes from Pistoia, Italy, where a man named Sir Luca wrote to his brother Franceschino describing the devastation. "I am sick at heart and can barely bring myself to write, for things here go from bad to worse. Many are dead and many more are dying. Shops are closed, taverns deserted. One passes down streets without meeting a soul. Wails of grief echo from houses where death has struck. The stench of rot rises from mass graves. I fear our city may soon be empty of life entirely. I beg you, stay where you are and pray for us unceasingly." Emotional deepening. In these grim chronicles of despair, the rawness of human suffering is laid bare, a haunting testament to the merciless grip of famine and plague. Imagine the chilling horror of witnessing a mother, starved and desperate, lose her child moments after her own death, an agonizing symbol of lives crushed beneath the weight of merciless hunger. Each winter was a cruel season, not only of cold but of dread, where hope flickered weakly against the ever-present shadow of starvation. The squalid living quarters, filled with coughing and feverish breaths, were breeding grounds for death itself, invisible yet unstoppable. The impotence of medieval medicine deepened the tragedy, where bleeding and purging, rather than healing, hastened the demise of the sick. Even the greatest rulers were powerless before the icy claws of illness. Through Sir Luca's anguished words, we glimpse the overwhelming desolation that consumed entire cities, empty streets, shuttered shops, and the heavy silence of death's reign. Yet even amid such darkness, the plea to pray for us unceasingly speaks to the flicker of faith and human connection that stubbornly endures. This history is not just a record of suffering, but a profound reminder of resilience, of humanity's fragile yet fierce will to survive through the bleakest winters, the darkest plagues, and the most harrowing trials. As the plague raged, entire villages were wiped out. The suffering was compounded by the trauma of hasty mass burials in frigid ground, and sick people expelled to die alone in the snow for fear of contagion. The devastating losses of the Black Death left deep psychological scars and forever altered the medieval world. Winter was an especially dreaded time for the elderly, young children, and expectant mothers. Without the benefits of modern medicine, these vulnerable populations frequently succumbed to cold, disease, or malnourishment. It's estimated that in some medieval societies, up to 20 to 30% of infants died within their first year of life, many during the harsh winter months. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth, made worse by poor diet and cold conditions, claimed the lives of countless mothers and babies. The dangers of winter childbirth are illustrated by the sad tale of Matilda, the 12-year-old daughter of King Henry I of England. In the winter of 1120, Matilda was aboard a ship called the White Ship, sailing from France to England. The ship hit a rock and quickly sank, sending Matilda and hundreds of other passengers into the frigid waters of the English Channel. Matilda nearly escaped drowning by getting into a small rescue boat, but then cried out for her half-brother William, who was still in the water. When the boat returned to get William, so many desperate people tried to climb in that it capsized, casting Matilda back into the cold waves. The king's young daughter, pregnant with her first child, perished along with the rest. Her grief-stricken father was said to have fainted dead away at the news and never smiled again for the rest of his life. The very old and very young were always in peril during the bleak winters of the Middle Ages. If they managed to survive disease and starvation, they still might freeze to death in their sleep. The medieval poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight contains a chilling, no pun intended, description of the elderly King Arthur shivering beneath his robes in a drafty castle hall, so cold his teeth chattered as he spoke. Without the insulating ice caps and glaciers we have today, winters in the Middle Ages were accompanied by raging snowstorms and devastating floods. In 1216, King John of England supposedly lost the crown jewels while crossing a marshy area in East Anglia called the Wash. Fleeing enemies in rebellion against his rule, John's baggage train was swallowed up by a surging high tide, whipped up by fierce gales. The king allegedly escaped by the skin of his teeth, but his treasure, including priceless jeweled crowns and scepters, disappeared into the churning waters, never to be seen again. John died of dysentery a few days later, a broken man. Some historians believe the loss of the crown jewels was the final blow that sent an ailing John to his grave. Winter storms often meant disaster for coastal communities, battered by hurricane-force winds and massive waves. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a terrible flood that struck England in 1099. On St. Martin's Day, the 11th of November, came a great sea flood through the length of this land, and overran it so far as no man remembered that it ever did before, drowning many towns and a countless number of people. Another North Sea flood on January 16th, 1219, completely submerged the low-lying Netherlands, killing over 50,000 people. In an era with no early warning systems or emergency shelters, the population was completely at the mercy of the elements. All medieval folk could do was pray for deliverance as icy floodwaters rose and the wind howled like the very hounds of hell outside their frail homes. Harsh winters also meant an increase in fires as people did whatever they could to keep warm. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle again gives a chilling account of a deadly London blaze in 1132. A dreadful fire broke out on London Bridge and spread so rapidly that before it could be extinguished, it burned down a great part of the city, including the principal church of St. Paul and the Cathedral of Canterbury, besides many other churches and houses. The force of the wind and the violence of the flames carried burning rafters and sheets of lead from the roofs an extraordinary distance. With most buildings made of timber and tightly crammed together, it's no wonder medieval cities were such tinderboxes. A stray spark or overturned candle could ignite an unstoppable inferno, especially when gale-force winter winds whipped the flames into a frenzy. People fled through narrow, twisting streets as their homes burned behind them, often with little more than the clothes on their backs. There are countless tragic stories of families separated in the chaos, children trampled, and people trapped and burned alive. Given the limited firefighting technology of the era, often all citizens could do was throw buckets of water or snow on the flames and pray the wind would shift before the entire city burned. The devastation could be near total, leaving thousands homeless and destitute in the dead of winter. But perhaps the greatest danger of medieval winter was something that required no great blizzards, floods, or conflagrations. Sometimes the simple, inescapable, life-sucking cold was enough. It's hard for us to imagine in our modern world of central heating and thermal fabrics, but the bone-chilling, damp, and constant dark of winter was an adversary from which there was little defense in the Middle Ages. With only smoky fires and piles of furs to ward off the chill, winter cold sank deep into the bones of medieval people. Arthritis and rheumatism were common afflictions, the pain growing worse with every passing year. Extremities slowly went numb, then black with frostbite. Pneumonia and influenza ran rampant in close quarters. The cold seemed to seep into the very soul, sapping all energy and vitality. The 6th century British monk Gildas paints a grim picture in his work on the ruin of Britain. The nights stretch long and dark, the days are bleak and biting cold. The very air seems to gnaw with malice, icy gusts cutting deep to the bone. Snow and frost lay heavy over all, an unyielding shroud of winter's harsh dominion. It is a season of immense suffering, where man and beast alike shiver under the cruel grip of a frozen hell. For the elderly and the frail, winter was a shadow of dread, a merciless time marked by the crushing fear that warmth might never return. They bundled layer upon layer of threadbare clothing, huddling close for any shared breath of heat. But still, the cold seeped through, relentless and unforgiving. Fires sputtered and choked in damp hearths, leaving behind only acrid smoke that burned eyes and stung throats. From the darkness came coughs and sniffles, punctuated by the low groans of the sick and dying. The cold held its icy claws around every moment, turning each breath into frost, numbing fingers and toes, and reaching deep into chests to squeeze out warmth and congeal the blood. Even the young, the strong, moved sluggishly as though wading through invisible freezing waters. Escape was impossible. No warm retreats or gentle comforts softened the winter's sting in the Middle Ages. There were no heated blankets or sunlit vacations. The cold was a constant, merciless companion, draining strength and hope alike. It is no surprise, then, that medieval people measured their lives not by months or years, but by how many winters they had survived. To see another spring was a triumph, one that grew ever more daunting with each passing season. Yet, despite the biting cold, the relentless disease, the gnawing hunger, and the numbing darkness, they endured. Season after brutal season, winter after merciless winter, the medieval folk persevered, armed with nothing but their indomitable spirits. When food stores dwindled to scraps, they tightened their belts and pressed on. When the fire burned low to glowing embers, they drew tattered blankets tighter still. And when darkness pressed in on every side, they huddled close, whispering tales of light and warmth yet to come. There is a poignant passage in the 14th century English poem Pierre's Plowman that captures this steadfastness perfectly. Through woe and winter's bale, frost and snow and sleet and hail, all shall pass and peace prevail. Hope shall triumph and never fail. Even in the coldest, darkest nights, moments of grace and joy flickered like fragile stars. Neighbors shared their scant provisions with those in even greater need. In the bleak cold and silence, communities gathered to sing, to pray, to hold fast. Some swore they heard angels' voices carried on the howling wind, promising warmth and light would return. So the people clung fiercely to hope, clutching life with trembling hands and eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where spring awaited in patient splendor. They knew deep in their bones that winter, no matter how brutal or unyielding, was only a season. The sun would rise again, the snow would melt, and the world would awaken, lush, green, and radiant, as though winter had never been at all. All they had to do was endure, and endure they did, drawing strength as if it were forged from the very ice and stone that surrounded them. The winters of the Middle Ages were brutal, merciless, and seemed to stretch endlessly, draping the land in hunger, disease, destruction, and death. Yet amid this harshness, the human spirit shone brightest, the unbreakable will to survive, to clutch desperately onto hope, to unite in compassion and kindness against the cold and darkness. Medieval society was tempered in winter's icy crucible, emerging stronger, tougher, and wiser, carrying within their bones a deep, reverent respect for the turning of the seasons. Perhaps then we might learn something from these ancestors as we grumble over scraping a few inches of frost off our windshields. For them, winter was a matter of life and death, a trial to be endured with gritted teeth and unwavering resolve. And endure they did. Their stories, etched in frost-bitten fields and frozen graves, live on as testament to the invincible power of the human spirit. In the quiet, cold heart of our modern winters, may we draw inspiration from their fortitude. The people of the Middle Ages stared winter straight in the face and refused to yield. They endured floods, famine, blizzards, and the darkest nights. They buried their dead beneath frozen earth and woke to the desperate groans of the starving. Yet always, always they clung to the promise of spring. If they could survive winter after winter armed with little more than faith and threadbare furs, surely we can summon the strength to face our own battles, knowing the thaw will come and light will return. Though those brutal medieval winters are long gone, their lessons echo through time, reminders of the endurance and resilience within us all. So let us walk in their footsteps, meeting winter's chill with courage, compassion, and unshakable hope. For if they could brave the darkest season with heads held high, then so can we. Winter is coming. But as the medieval world knew so well, spring is never far behind. As the biting winds howled across frozen landscapes, people gathered close to flickering hearth fires, huddled together for precious warmth. They shared tales of winters past, those cruel seasons that tested the mettle of even the strongest souls. In humble cottages and grand manor houses alike, winter's icy breath spared no one. Drafty shutters and thin thatch offered little defense against the relentless cold. From peasants to princes, all felt Jack Frost's bite, nipping at noses, numbing fingers and toes. Some were lucky enough to have roaring hearths, their crackling flames and smoky aroma offering brief comfort against winter's siege. In noble castles, great hall fireplaces devoured vast quantities of wood, tended by servants shivering just as much as those they served. Yet even the mightiest nobles trembled to step beyond the fire's glow, for winter's chill had a cruel way of seeping through thick stone walls and rich furs alike. This was winter in the medieval world, a season that challenged bodies and spirits but also revealed the fierce light within the human heart. For those of low birth, winter was a merciless trial, a grim, relentless battle for mere survival. Their rough, humble hovels offered scant refuge from the biting cold. Sparse rations of peat or wood, scavenged from shadowed forests, barely coaxed life from the sputtering hearths. Families huddled tightly in cramped, squalid quarters, sharing not just precious body heat, but air thick with smoke and the heavy, unyielding stench of unwashed humanity. The existence was bleak beyond measure, and yet, even amid such hardship, flickers of joy dared to glow. The village square, warmed by communal fires, called the weary from their hovels, offering but a brief respite from the cold and despair. Around the leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests and jibes, stories woven with laughter and song. For those fleeting moments, the harsh reality of winter seemed to soften and fade. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their passion undimmed by frost-bitten air. Children's delighted shrieks echoed as they skated and slid across frozen ponds, careless of the chill. Even the elderly, weighed down by the burdens of many years, felt the heavy cloak of age lift, for a brief, treasured spell, transported back to the carefree winters of their youth. These interludes of merriment were precious beyond measure, their rarity sharpening their sweetness, for winter's assault was unforgiving and ceaseless. Soon, thoughts turned to empty bellies and the gnawing hunger that stalked the poor like a relentless shadow. Dreams of spring's bounty felt like cruel mockery, as barren fields lay shrouded beneath an unyielding blanket of snow. The specter of famine loomed large and dark in these lean times. A single failed harvest could doom whole villages to despair. Mothers watched in anguish as their children's cheeks grew gaunt, eyes dull and hollowed by starvation's grip. Scarcity forced desperate measures. Whispers told of unthinkable acts born from unbearable need, haunting nightmares of the faithful. Yet hunger was only one cruel scourge stalking the land. Winter's cold breath bred a host of maladies that preyed upon the weakened. Pneumonia's hacking cough haunted many a hovel, while pox and flux raged unchecked, ravaging families. The very old and very young were most vulnerable, their frail bodies ill-equipped to withstand winter's fierce wrath. Perhaps the greatest cruelty was reserved for those who braved the merciless fury outside. Travelers risked life and limb on treacherous roads glazed with ice. Many a hapless wayfarer met a bitter fate, swallowed by swirling blizzards or lost in deep snowdrifts. Their frozen bodies lay undiscovered until spring's thaw, a chilling testament to winter's lethal dominion. Even the valiant knights, armored champions of the realm, were not spared winter's harshness. Clad in heavy mail, they became easy prey for the bone-piercing cold that seeped into every seam and rivet, chilling flesh and spirit alike. Numb hands, made clumsy by frozen gauntlets, fumbled with sword and shield. Once mighty charges floundered in the deep snow drifts as icicles formed on their heaving flanks. Great and small alike cursed the name of winter. In the halls of power, the crown weighed heavy on royal brows furrowed with care. For even a monarch could not decree the seasons to reverse their inexorable turn. The cost of keeping the court supplied with provender and firewood was staggering. Royal treasuries groaned beneath the strain as grasping merchants reaped handsome profits from the king's largesse. But for all the miseries it engendered, winter's reign was not eternal. Even in the depths of icy despair, folk clung to the promise of spring's sweet renewal. The joyous feast of St. Stephen offered a welcome reprieve from winter's woes. For one raucous day, the world turned upside down as a lowly peasant assumed the mantle of the Lord of Misrule. Drunken revelry and rowdy songs lifted spirits and lightened hearts. Laughter, that balm for the careworn soul, echoed through the frost-bitten land. In the fullness of time, winter's gelled grip began to loosen. Icicles dripped from the eaves as the strengthening sun worked its subtle magic. Snowdrops and crocuses pushed their way through the softening earth, delicate harbingers of winter's retreat. The land stirred with new life, shaking off the torpid slumber of the frozen months. Hearts lifted and voices raised in joyful celebration. The Feast of the Plow marked the triumphant return of spring's verdant splendor. Sleek oxen dragged gleaming plowshares through rich, dark earth as the cycle of planting and renewal began anew. The lean times of winter soon faded into memory as fields rippled with the green and golden bounty of the land. Looking back across the centuries, we marvel at the fortitude of our medieval forebears. Year after pitiless year, they endured winter's cruelties with a stoicism born of necessity. Their strength of spirit and unbreakable bonds of community were the secret of their survival. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they found pockets of hope and moments of shared humanity. So the next time we grumble about the inconvenience of a delayed flight or the indignity of slushy streets, let us pause and reflect. Our modern winter woes are but a shadow of what once was. In the tapestry of human history, the icy trials of the Middle Ages loom large. They serve as a reminder of our species' remarkable resilience and the preciousness of a warm hearth and a full belly. As we drift off to slumber, let us spare a thought for those who came before. In our dreams, perhaps we will catch a glimpse of their world, a harsher, crueler world than our own, and yet one in which the indomitable human spirit shone all the brighter for the darkness that surrounded it. Good night and sweet dreams of gentle spring breezes to come. As the bitter chill of winter descended once more upon the weary lands of medieval Europe, for the poor peasants who scraped out a meager living from the soil, the very warmth and light seemed to retreat from the world, replaced by a deep, aching cold that penetrated to the bone. With little more than rags on their backs and scant food in their bellies, they could do nothing but shiver and suffer in their drafty hovels as the cruel winds howled just beyond their walls. The fortunate few with fireplaces and stores of wood might huddle together for warmth in the flickering glow. But for most, the only comfort was the shared body heat of family and livestock packed in close quarters, the fetid stench of unwashed bodies mingling with the steam of cattle breath. One can only imagine the coughs, the fevers, and the agonizing aches that must have plagued them in the damp and crowded squalor. It's a wonder any emerged alive on the other side of winter's interminable reign. But even the highest-born nobles, for all their thick furs and grand feasts, were not immune to the icy grasp of the season. Great medieval castles with their soaring stone walls and cavernous halls became like vast refrigerators in wintertime. The chills seeped up from the floors and down from the ceilings until they saturated the very air, defying even the mightiest of blazing hearths to banish it. There are tales of royal winter woes to make one shudder in sympathy. In the 15th century, Queen Elizabeth Woodville, consort of King Edward IV of England, was said to have actually frozen to death in her own chambers one uncommonly frigid night. While records are murky and much embellished, one account claims that, despite being swaddled in heavy robes and furs, the poor woman succumbed to the deep cold and was found in the morning frozen stiff as a board. Whether the story is true or not, it certainly illustrates the perilous nature of winter for even the most privileged. Kings and queens might avoid the roaring hunger and squalid conditions of their low-born subjects, But in some ways, the hazards of the season were a great equalizer. After all, royals could no more command the elements than they could live without air. The chill found its way into even the most luxurious of medieval bedchambers. And so, as the days grew shorter and the nights ever darker and more frigid, the whole of medieval society braced itself for the annual onslaught of winter's wrath. From the lowliest cottager to the loftiest lord, a sense of grim endurance seemed to settle upon the populace, a knowledge that the only way out was through. Stores of grains and salted meats were checked and rechecked. Every scrap of wood and kindling was jealously hoarded, and heavy woolen garments were donned in stoic anticipation. The only spark of levity and hope in the whole bleak affair came with the Christmas festivities surrounding the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th. For a few merry days, the normal social order was gleefully upended as a lord of misrule was appointed from among the peasantry to preside over a bawdy array of feasts, dances, games, and general mischief. With bellies full of ale and wine, faces flushed from the press of bodies and the exertions of revelry, the common folk could, for a brief shining moment, forget the long privations of winter and revel in the joys of life and community. One can imagine the scenes of boisterous celebration erupting in halls and public squares across the land. The raucous laughter, the wheezing of reed pipes and fiddles as the people capered about in a whirling kaleidoscope of color and mirth. For once, serfs and noblemen mingled freely, the usual lines of class and station erased in the spirit of goodwill and fellowship. The Lord of Misrule, perhaps a puffed-up young peasant lad with stars in his eyes, issued grandiose proclamations and ridiculous decrees to the delight of all. It must have been a heady thing, that burst of misrule and satire amid the bleakness. But as with all things, the festive season was but a temporary respite, the eye of the storm. As the Yule log burned down to embers and the last wassail bowl was drained, the people drifted back to their hearths, and the aching cold darkness once more descended. The gaiety of St. Stephen's Day and the Lord of Misrule's brief shining reign were replaced again by the grim business of survival as winter tightened its grip. For the next interminable stretch of months, time seemed to slow to a frigid crawl. With the land frozen and unworkable, there was little for the rural peasantry to do but hunker down and pray for deliverance. The shortening days and lengthening nights yawned like a vast chasm from which there was no escape. Huddled together in their crude shelters against the killing cold, they must have despaired of ever again feeling the kiss of spring's warm breath upon their faces. But even the cruelest winter cannot last forever. And indeed, beneath the hard frozen earth, the first tentative green shoots strained upward, quietly biding their time in patient promise. For those who endured, who clung fiercely to hope and to one another through the darkest, coldest nights, the thaw would come again. The sun would return to reclaim the sky. The blood would quicken and pulse anew in weary veins. The world would gradually cast off its gray and white shroud, bursting forth into a vibrant riot of color and life. On Plough Monday, just after Epiphany, the soil would once more be broken, the great wheel of the agricultural year groaning and creaking back into motion. The people would emerge, blinking against the pale yet growing light of spring, leaner, worn, but alive and profoundly grateful. Fields would be furrowed, seeds pressed into the warming earth, flocks driven out to nibble on the fresh grass, and the endless, joyful dance of life would begin anew. But for now, that promise was still distant. For now, the cruel heart of winter still beat with icy relentlessness. The people of the Middle Ages steeled themselves once more against its harsh assault. They drew what little comfort they could from their coarse woolen cloaks, their smoky, humble hovels, the meager stores of food carefully hoarded, but most of all from one another. In a world so saturated with hardship and danger, where even the seasons seemed bent on breaking the spirit, they endured as they always had, together, lords and peasants alike, young and old, shivering under the same bleak winter sky, their breaths misting in the frozen air, waiting for the spring that must inevitably come. And so they hunkered down in the darkness and the cold, listening to the mournful howl of the wind and the groan of cracking ice. They spun tales and wove dreams to while away the long, frozen nights. Perhaps they imagined a kinder future, Winters softened, hearths glowing warmer, bellies fuller. A world that their trembling hands and aching bones might one day build for generations yet unborn. Or perhaps they simply held tightly to whatever scraps of light and hope they could summon in the moment, knowing deep in their hearts that even the longest, harshest winter must finally give way to spring. In the face of such brutal, unyielding conditions, the resilience of the human spirit, its power to endure, to believe in brighter days ahead, is nothing short of miraculous. One cannot help but feel a profound admiration for the strength of our medieval forebears, who met each bitter winter as a relentless adversary, and year after year emerged to greet the life-affirming warmth of spring beyond the frost. Let us then tip our hats to those long ago lords and peasants who suffered much and yet endured still more. In our modern world of central heating and on-demand grocery deliveries, it can be easy to forget the hardships they faced as a matter of course. But as we drift off to sleep in our warm beds, perhaps we can spare a thought for those huddled medieval masses and marvel at the strength that carried them through winter after winter, waiting for the light's return. In a world so often cold and dark, such enduring hope and resilience is a fire that cannot be quenched, burning on from their distant hovels to our own night-swaddled rooms. May we keep that flame alive in our hearts, come what winter may. As the long winter months dragged on, medieval folk looked forward to any opportunity to lift their spirits and foster a sense of community and goodwill amidst the hardships. One such beacon of hope was the Feast of St. Stephen. It's celebrated each year on December 26th. Though the origins of this midwinter celebration are somewhat obscure, by the Middle Ages it had become a cherished tradition across much of Europe. After the solemn religious observances of Christmas Day, St. Stephen's Day was a time for merrymaking, feasting, and the playful reversal of normal social roles. Central to the festivities was the custom of misrule, where a peasant or commoner would be appointed Lord of Misrule for the day and granted the power to command their social superiors. This light-hearted upending of the status quo provided a much-needed release valve for the rigid class tensions that normally dominated medieval life. The Lord of Misrule presided over a topsy-turvy day of revelry, leading raucous processions through the streets, initiating mischievous pranks, and decreeing that everyone from lords to laborers should make merry together. Professional entertainers like minstrels, jugglers, and jesters would ply their trades, while games of chance and skill kept the crowds amused. Sporty comedic sketches called mummers' plays were performed, reenacting tales from legend and folklore in broad, exaggerated strokes. Mock jousts and farcical court proceedings induced peals of laughter, a welcome respite from the grim realities of winter life. Of course, no medieval celebration was complete without a hearty feast. On St. Stephen's Day, the Lord of Misrule could insist that the wealthy provide food and drink for the whole community, a charitable gesture that fostered goodwill and fellowship among all. Roasted meats were the centerpiece of the feast. From geese and capons to the traditional roast boar's head, these were marched in with great fanfare. Minced meat pies heavy with dried fruit and spices offered a sweet treat, while the wassail bowl flowed freely. The warm, spiced cider bolstered everyone's spirits. One can almost hear the laughter and lively chatter ringing through the halls, rising above the blustery winter winds outside. For one brief shining day, the hardships of winter faded into the background as the community came together in a spirit of joy and camaraderie. As the feast concluded and the revelers dispersed back to their hearths, they carried the warmth of the festivities with them like a flicker of cheery firelight in the dark. The knowledge that they had friends and neighbors to rely on, that they could find moments of laughter and levity even in the bleakest times, surely helped buoy their spirits for the hard days still ahead. And somehow the winter's icy grip seemed a bit less harsh, the howling winds a bit more bearable, when one had a belly full of good food and a heart full of fellowship. The Feast of St. Stephen was a timely reminder that even the deepest darkness of winter would eventually yield to the first hopeful stirrings of spring. Those fragile shoots of new life began to tentatively emerge as the winter snow receded and the frozen ground began to thaw across the countryside. Watchful eyes eagerly scanned for the appearance of snowdrops, those valiant little flowers that poked, their fresh green stalks and delicate white blooms through the melting slush. Their arrival heralded that the long night of winter was finally ending and the season of rebirth was approaching. In villages everywhere, weary folk rejoiced to see the first hints of color and vitality return to a landscape that had been shrouded in icy white stillness for so many months. With a newfound spring in their steps, medieval peasants returned to the rhythms of the agricultural year. The great wheel of life began to turn once more. Hibernating livestock were led out to pastures starting to green again, while the farmer hitched his team to the plow, eager to churn the softening earth. The first Monday after Epiphany, falling in January, came to be known as Plow Monday for this very reason. It marked the moment when the land could be worked again after the winter freeze, inaugurating the labors of a new farming season. Plows that had been stored away for the winter months were hauled out and blessed in joyful Plow Monday processions through the fields, while plowmen went from door to door collecting food, ale, and small coins, again, all in anticipation of the work and harvest to come. One can picture a weather-beaten village huddled around their communal plot, faces turned gratefully toward a sky brightening into a paler shade of blue. With hoes and digging sticks in hand, they prepare to sink the first hopeful seeds into the receptive soil, an act of faith that spring would conquer winter in due time. Among them is the wizened old grandmother, a child clutching each gnarled hand as she shows them how to plant the peas, just as her own grandmother once taught her many long springs ago. The smaller child giggles with delight as a rotund earthworm wriggles free from the dirt, while the older child solemnly pushes each seed into its waiting hollow. Beneath this simple scene lies a profound testament to hope and continuity, a moment where the harshness of the past months yields to the promise of growth and renewal. The shared labor, the passing down of knowledge from one generation to the next, and the gentle wonder of a child's laughter intertwine to paint a vivid picture of resilience and life's enduring cycle. It is in these small acts, against the backdrop of nature's rhythms, that the medieval people found strength to persevere and joy to embrace the future. It was in moments like these, when ancient wisdom flowed gently from weathered hands to eager young ones, when life stirred anew beneath the cold earth, that the bitter hardships of winter found their meaning. The grandmother's warm smile, the crinkles around her eyes held a quiet promise. The darkest days were behind them, and life was beginning its steady return to the land once more. As the seeds nestled deep into their earthen beds, and the strengthening sun coaxed fragile green shoots upward, the relentless grip of winter finally loosened, slipping away on the soft whispers of spring's gentle breeze. That heavy pull of cold and death which had hung over them so long gave way to a spirit of hope and renewal carried on those very winds. From our comfortable modern perch, it humbles us to imagine the immense strength and endurance required to withstand such brutal medieval winters, year after year. Without the conveniences and comforts we now take for granted, their mere survival until the warmth of spring was nothing short of miraculous. Yet amid such overwhelming hardship, medieval folk still found reasons to hope, to rejoice, to celebrate. The warmth of community gatherings, the promise of the coming season, the healing balm of laughter and fellowship. These were the beacons guiding them through the darkest depths of winter. Perhaps as we burrow deeper beneath our cozy comforters, shielded from the cold, we might spare a grateful thought for those ancestors of ours. Next time the winter wind rattles our windows and we grumble at the chill, let us pause and smile wryly, knowing that our modern winter troubles pale in comparison to the relentless trials faced by those who came before, century upon century of enduring cold and darkness. And as we drift into sleep, let us carry within us the ember of that same invincible summer that burned fiercely in the hearts of medieval souls, the unshakable assurance that no matter how harsh the night, spring will always return. To conclude our journey today, how do you feel about the stories and vivid images of harsh winters and the resilient spirit of medieval people? I hope these reflections have touched your heart and helped you appreciate the strength and hope within each of us, no matter the era. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, remember to send warm goodnight wishes to your loved ones. wishing you a peaceful night and sweet dreams.